Barnes & Noble Union Square, please give a warm welcome to Holly Black and Naomi Novik. Holly Black is the #1 New York Times bestselling and award-winning author of speculative and fantasy novels, short stories, and comics. Book of Night is her first adult fiction. We also have Naomi Novik, who is the New York Times bestselling author of the Scholomance trilogy. And I know we are all very excited for the 3rd book coming out in September. Take it away, you two.
It's true. I was trying to get Golden Enclave spoilers backstage.
My child was with us in the green room, and she's read it, and so I was like, "How is it?" And she's like, "It's good," So I'm like,
Yeah, I thought I was gonna get something out of her, but she was like, "No, I know better." I was like, "Man, this is rough."
But all right, we're going to talk about Book of Night, which I am super excited about. So obviously, you guys probably have not had a chance to read it unless, some of you are really, really fast readers. So we're going to keep this mostly spoiler-free. We're going to start with some sort of more general questions, and then I've got a few sort of like book jacket spoiler level stuff to talk about, and then we're going to ask you guys for questions. All right, so obviously the first thing is, one of the things that you talked about actually in the notes was that for 20 years you've wanted to write an adult book. Why now?
That's a great question.
Sorry.
So I think it was in a large part because when I was actually planning out my schedule, I planned out a space for this. And then my agent was like, "This is the space for that." And I was like, "Oh, is that real? I'm really going to do that." And so I actually it was really about having the space and making the decision, because it's true. I had kind of thought of writing an adult book. So the first book I ever wrote, which is Tithe, I thought was an adult book when I was writing it. It's about a 16-year-old, but there were lots of 16-year-olds in, novels. And she discovered she was a fairy changeling, which seemed like, if she had discovered at 30, she would maybe not seem like the sharpest knife in the drawer. Now, look, no shade to anyone who is discovering they're a fairy changeling at 30. But, I wrote it that way, and so I kind of fell into young adult, and I told myself over and over again that I would someday run away to adult publishing where everything would be great all the time.
So this obviously leads me to the next question, which is, how different did you find it? Did you find it because obviously, I feel similarly, like the books that I've written that are, considered crossover YA, I don't know what they are when I'm writing them. Did you feel like you knew when you were writing this one that it was an adult book, and from the start, like when the story came to you?
I did. I knew it was an adult book because I was setting it, I was writing about a almost 30-year-old character, and I had sort of deliberately chosen to make that decision to sort of put her in the adult space. And I thought it would not be any different because, it's a book. It's a story about a person who does some things. And they might be slightly different things, but how different could they be? But I did find it different. That extra 10 years is different. It makes, and there were, I think I got in my own head a little bit about, I felt like I don't quite know where things sit. Like I had a sense of what YA was. Like when you made a decision, a narrative decision, I understood sort of what that meant in terms of what book jacket you got. And I kept making narrative decisions and thinking, what does this change about the book jacket? And then I would call people up. Like I called up Paolo and I was like, so, okay, open world fantasy, closed world fantasy. What's really the smart commercial choice? And he was like, closed world fantasy. And I was like, great. And then I changed it to an open world fantasy. So I did my usual, fretting and then ignoring all of the wise things I managed to glean.
Right, which is obviously always the right choice. And did you find that there was a difference in the sense of, like, the rhythm of the book, the length of the book, any of that sort of thing, like the pacing? Did you find it was changed?
So Miriam, my editor, Miss Gamer, many times said, look, slow down, take some space here. You know, this is a thing in adult where you take a little bit of extra time and you build this out. And that was something that it was really fun to have the space to do. Mm-hmm. And I think there were also just things that were adult moments that I didn't get to put into other books. Like there's a moment here where our protagonist Charlie is going home. She knows she's going to fight with her boyfriend and she's thinking about putting on lipstick. You know, and I was like, this is the most adult thing I have ever written. And there just are. There are experiences that are adult experiences that it was interesting to actually get to write about.
Well, and she also has, obviously, these layers of past experience, mm-hmm. right? She's almost been multiple people already, right?
Right. And it was hard to think of that because you think, okay, I need to think of this. And then I need to think about what happened next. And then I need to, the thing about the thing that happens after that. Also, people have to go to their jobs every day. This was a terrible surprise to me.
Speaking about Charlie's job, right? So she works at Rapture, and there's this sense of place, right, to all of these. And, when I got to the end, actually, I had a little moment because I'm reading through it and I was like, this feels really familiar. And my sister was a resident at Bay State. Oh. And so we get to Bay State and I'm like, I know where I am. That's why it's so familiar. Talk about, how did the place come into the story for you? Did you know from the beginning that you were going to be setting it in kind of the place where you live, really?
I didn't initially, but I did pretty quickly after. And once I made that decision, it was really useful because it was a landscape that I really hadn't much written about before. And certainly not at this level of specificity. But I had written many books about set in New Jersey where I grew up. And it was because I really felt like I knew the ins and outs and the secret places. And I've been up where I live in Western Massachusetts since 2004, and I felt like I finally knew sort of enough about it to be able to write a book set there.
Right. And it's interesting because I felt being there, in fact, and I felt like that came really clearly through in the book, that there's this really interesting sort of town-gown divide, right? It's this area where there's a sort of almost like a small town working class area, but it's also so many college towns around that you get a kind of town gown crossing and some interesting sort of class issues, which really kind of commit. So I open the door. Tell us about them.
Yeah, I mean, I have had the experience of knowing people who've grown up there and sort of their perception of the world and their spaces and the way they navigate it, and then also sort of students or professors. And it really is, they're different worlds and they're separated worlds. And like so many places, it has these extremely wealthy areas next to these areas that are not at all wealthy. And it has these super beautiful old houses in these old towns that have lost their sort of manufacturing places. And so they have fallen into neglect and are constantly on Zillow tempting me because they're so beautiful, but kind of far from my friends and from my kids' school and everything, but so beautiful. But they, so it is a really, so many places, a really weird space where you have these liminal pockets. Mm-hmm. And also it also just has people who, I've never met a person who came out to do something to my house that didn't have some kind of side hustle. You have somebody who's I'm going to fix your slate, but also, let me tell you about the cheese that I am making on my farm, or I make candles, or also I'm a massage therapist, and here's my card. Everybody, does three things. Right. And they all are kind of artists about the whole thing, so, you hire someone to do something, they might come. They'll come when they're ready. When the time is right to fix your roof, they will come. Which, coming from New Jersey, was not a thing I understood at all. I really needed to get used to. It's just a different place.
Right. And that's actually, I think you talk about this quite early in the book. So hang on, I'm just going to make sure I'm not doing a massive spoiler. Yes, right. So you talked about the kind of the ecosystem that people build of amateurs, of like exactly the person who can do that sort of thing. And I feel like that works really interestingly with Charlie's life, this sense that
Right.
she's got her job, but she's also one of these people.
Right. I was talking about, like, if you don't have a lot of money, you often create an ecosystem around you of people who do stuff. And I realized this because I grew up in that kind of ecosystem, and I'm now kind of dealing with people who didn't have it. And so I'm used to the idea that you get somebody's mom's friend to make your cake for something.
Right.
You don't hire somebody who does that. And it's a whole different knowledge base to shift over. And so it was interesting to think about, like, well, what if Charlie is here and then other characters are in a different place?
Right. And so moving on from this to the question, obviously this is shadow magic, right?
Yeah.
Do you want maybe like give people your elevator pitch of
For
the
what-
shadow
for what
magic,
shadow
just
magic is.
just to sort of set it up for those who haven't.
Okay, so there are these shadow magicians. They're called gloamists. And what happens is some people have shadows that are quickened, which means they're magic. And so they can direct them to do things. They can send them out to strangle people, spy on people. They can turn them into wings that they can actually use to fly with. So depending on sort of how they specialize and what they learn, they can use their shadow magic in different ways. But most people don't have that. And one of the other things that gloamists can do is they can alter your shadows cosmetically. So if you want a shadow that looks a little different, you can go to a gloamist and they will fix up your shadow for you. And it will imbue a tiny bit of magic. So you can't fly, but maybe you could hover a little sometimes. And they also can remove pieces of your shadow, which may remove certain things you want to change about yourself. Like, you want to quit smoking, so you have a gloamist come and take a piece of your shadow out. But is that all it does?
And so one of the interesting things was the sense that you get throughout of shadow lives and shadow worlds, right? And that town gown divide feels like one of them. Charlie's own life, where she's sort of trying to live this kind of straight and narrow life, but for her, clearly all the life and energy is in the sort of illicit underground life. Yeah, so basically that sense of how many. I felt like I kept seeing it throughout the book, the sense of these worlds, and that image of the drowned. The drowned, is that
The drowned
real?
towns, it is
yes.
real.
Sorry. So maybe you should tell like what that is.
So there's this area called the Quabbin Reservoir, and part of where it is, there used to be a town, and so they drowned the town. Like, they didn't obviously drown the people, and they didn't even drown all the buildings. In fact, the house I live in now is a house that they moved from the Quabbin area before they flooded it. But at the bottom of the reservoir are this town, theoretically, still there.
Right. And this sense of sort of multiple lives, and which life matters and which life was one of those things that I felt was really strong.
So I would love to hear you talk about this, because I was thinking, people have asked me, like, well, what makes a magic system, right? And I've been thinking a lot about the way that magic systems are about the question of the story and the question of the protagonist. And so often you go back and forth and sort of say, okay, here's what this protagonist is, okay, here's what this magic system is, because they have to be thematically resonant, right? And story generative.
Right.
And so, in a book about shadow magic, right, you have to be talking about, like, all of our shadow selves and the sort of parts of ourselves we don't want to acknowledge, our shame, our fear, our desire, and like how we sort of shunt that off. And I think the question of the book really, in a lot of ways, is, do we need that stuff?
Right.
Like,
And
who are we
how
without
is that
stuff,
generative, right?
Right.
How is that generative in your own life, right? Those potentially negative things.
And so
Yeah.
I'm curious, how do you approach,
Yeah.
when you are creating a magic system, to sort of address that, I guess?
So actually, I mean, this is going to be one of those interesting things to talk about, because I don't sit down and create a magic system. I write, and as I write, various, spells occur, magic occurs. Because, obviously, one of those things, right, that when you're writing a fantasy or when you're writing speculative fiction, people are always like, well, why don't you write just regular fiction, right? And I always say, well, regular fiction is a subset. Fantasy is, in fact, the superset of all fiction. And it is...
This answer.
Well, it's, because the thing is, fantasy is about keeping control of the set, right? Writing fantasy science fiction allows you to control not just what your characters do, but literally the entire world. And obviously, that can go haywire. But on the other hand, it does give you the power to really kind of create a magic system that actually illuminates something about the characters. And for me, at least, when I'm writing, it always sort of comes piecemeal. The character needs to do something, and I'm like, all right, what would be the act that would happen in this scenario? And sort of for Scholomance, they're in a school, so it almost implies a kind of magic that you have to learn. There has to be studying. It cannot just be sort of inborn, right?
We're just here.
We just hang out in this school for fun, said nobody ever, right?
Certainly not those people.
Right, yeah. Yeah, so how about you? Did you sort of really think about and nail down, like at which point did you decide this was going to be a shadow magic book and how all the pieces of your system were going to work?
I knew I wanted to write a shadow magic book, so I started with that. But I definitely worked out an entire magic system on a large piece of paper that was covering my dining room table, and then I wound up having to change it because as I went, it was cool, but it wasn't story generative. It didn't go anywhere. It didn't make people make hard decisions. And so I had to kind of go back and alter it. And I feel like one of the reasons that it would be a mistake for me, at least, to create a magic system and then write a book is because it has to me go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, right. To make it be the thing that seems like the most fun. But now it's made. Yeah. And this is why I always like future books. Because now I have some parameters.
Right, and it becomes the constraint that the story can bounce off of. Although, actually, I have to admit, I have in fact now basically started writing into my contracts that I get to write the entire trilogy or series or duology or whatever before they publish any part of it. Because too often, like, I got to Golden Enclaves, I was like, there was that one line in book 1 that I should have changed, And I was like, this would have been better, but, but it's like, it's on the shelf. I can't go and steal everybody's copies and change them.
It's true. That is a good idea.
Right? Is there anything, have you ever had that experience, like you're in like the 3rd book, the 4th book, and you're like, oh, if only I'd realized this moment was coming, I would have done that differently? Or once the book is out, is it, like, how much do you believe in your own canon, right?
Right. I mean, I believe less in my canon than anyone else's, but I definitely do like having things nailed down because I like trying to get around my own rules, and I can't do that until I establish my own rules. Like I like this sort of player character aspect of writing, and so I do mostly stick to it. I think the things I regret the most are are killing villains that I really feel like would have been useful.
Yes.
Keep them around.
Yes. Don't kill villains. They're the best.
They're defeated.
Right.
And then I'm like, why did I defeat them? Couldn't they have just like a sprained ankle or something?
And all right, hang on. I had one other question that I wanted to. Oh yes, that's right. So speaking about shadow magic, I was wondering what brought you to that, and specifically, there are some things. There's one place in the book where you describe a story by Hans Christian Andersen, and I could have Googled this, but I thought it was much more fun to ask you. Is that a real story?
It is a real story.
Because I would have totally believed if you had just told me, like, I just made up this Hans Christian Andersen story. Yeah.
When I gave the book to Sarah Brennan, she was like, I think you should change this part. And I was like, it's real. Like, this is a real fairy tale. I understand why you think it's not. Because weirdly, it's super clear. And I found it late in the process, and I was like, this is weirdly sticks to a lot of the rules that I kind of came up with. And I think it's because so much of our idea of shadow magic does come out of certain beliefs, right? We've there's some Peter Pan,
Right. I was
right?
going
There's
to
some
say
Peter Pan
right?
stuff. One of the things that really, though, made me want to do this, and it made me want to do it for a while, is that there was this piece of folklore that I read about where there was a woman who fell asleep on a hill, and when she woke up, there was a little man with scissors cutting away her shadow, and he ran off, but she had this sense of dread that if he had managed to get her shadow, something terrible would have happened, and that really stuck with me. And then I was just walking home from town with my son, and he was watching his shadow get bigger and smaller and bifurcate, and I thought, this is magic, right? This is magic. It's a magic we all are familiar with. And that's my favorite kind of thing to start with when you create a magic system, where you sort of have certain beliefs. The annoying thing is then people really do have beliefs. And so there were parts of this, like when I first had people's shadows be altered, I didn't have them imbue some minor magic. And people really pushed back. They just assumed it did.
Right.
And so later when I said it didn't, they hit this real snag.
That
And so
makes
I think-
sense, actually.
right?
Yes,
And so
right.
there's
If your
certain
shadow
things you have to
changes,
do.
right.
When you work with what people believe, you have to actually have it be the way they want it to be.
Right. Can I ask you, was Earthsea at all an inspiration? Is that
Probably,
Right.
but I didn't think of it before this moment.
because I had to say I thought of Ged with his shadow right as soon as we're there. All right, so let me. Sorry, I'm like this is my fault for writing my notes in the middle of this extremely nice book with very
So
big
fancy, that
pages.
notebook.
Yes,
Look at
it's
that.
literally like Napoleon.
I would be afraid to write.
It's I got it in the in Napoleon's tomb in Paris. So
I
yes,
would be
it's like
especially.
right. Yes, I stole it out of the. It's like no. Sadly, I'm not like Charlie Hall. So actually, one of the other things that I sort of missed from earlier was what. So this was 20 years coming. What do you want to do 20 years from now? Sorry, not to like put you on the spot or anything. Do you feel like I mean, I hope there are sequels coming.
There's a duology.
Good.
There's definitely another book.
Good.
I will be 70 years old in 20 years.
You know, hopefully still around.
I want to know how to outline and then stick to my outline. That's what I want. 20 years, that's what I want.
Right. Do you like to outline first? And
Yeah. I mean, I love outlining. I like colored pencils. I like graph paper. I like note cards. I'm just bad at it. Like I make an outline, then I immediately veer off of it. Are you good at outlining?
No, I only make outlines when I'm contractually obligated, and I try to forget them as soon as possible.
Really?
Yeah.
Like all I want is for one of these things to be the way through.
You know, but I don't know. I feel very much that you want to go with the character, right? Well, in fact, what you're talking about the magic system, right? You know, I always feel that the character and the world build each other, and they're taking turns is where plot happens, right? And you know, so what does a character do in this situation? If you don't know, you need to know more about the character. You need to make a decision. So they do something. What happens? Well, if you don't know what happens, then you have to invent a little more of the magic system, a little more of the world, and then, right.
Do you do that at the same time, I guess is my question.
Yeah. I mean, it's literally line by line.
I feel like my problem is I don't. I kind of figure out what happens, and then I have the character fight it, which changes what happens.
Right. Well, I do feel like as long as you let the character win, right? That to me is the important thing. That the character has to be allowed to win.
Right. Well, then I need to change it though again, because then the other side needs to fight the character who fought the thing that happened.
Right.
And that's why I don't know what happened until pretty late in my books.
Yes. No, you know, there is that moment though, right, where you've written far enough along that you're suddenly like, oh, this is how. Do you get that moment? Like, where in the book do you usually get that moment?
In the fourth draft. No, really. And I have that moment of, oh, I know what this is. And now everything is like making sense and easy and organic, but it does not come until then, which is why.
Right. It's interesting. I don't actually do drafts. I go back and I mean, I basically am going back to the beginning and revising through every time I sort of.
I mean, you're right. You're right that is also what I do.
Yeah, you know.
How many times? Like a lot.
I don't know that I can count it.
Yeah, okay.
Like, yeah.
I'm with you.
Right.
It's true. I've mostly thought of drafts in a way that is about handing it in.
Right.
Not actually how many times I've gone through it.
Yeah. No, because it's just always going back and going back and going back. And here, so we've got. So hang on. We've got. So we are live streaming, and we have some questions from the folks who are who got to send questions in, who are not able to be with us actually live in person in this strange, mysterious way, and so this is an interesting question about this, and it's about female lead characters. Do you have models in real life for your characters? And sorry, this is a question from Nobina in New York, and sort of asking, do you have models for your characters in life? Do you think about that? Do you deliberately choose when you're going to have a female lead versus a male lead?
You're going to have to answer this too. I do think about it in terms of who the character is. I think the thing that I think about the most is I'm really interested in characters who are deeply flawed and who make giant mistakes. Like, that's what I'm here for. That's what I like to write. It's the thing I love in books. I love the moment when you see a character who's going to do something and you think, oh, don't do that. and then they do it and things are much more interesting and much weirder. And so I think a lot about that stuff.
And in fact, I was going to say, one of the interesting things about Charlie is she is self-aware, right? But she's a self-aware mess, right? She's somebody who is simultaneously sort of, you feel like she's smart, she's with it, she recognizes that she's making extremely bad decisions,
right.
And yet she makes them anyway in that completely believable human way, right? Where we're like, yes, I'm doing the bad thing, right?
Watch me do it.
Right. And that's an interesting tension, I feel, right? Where you have a character who is consciously doing something that they know is not the smart thing to do, and that often, right, leads to them making story.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, what would you say to this? Because I feel like this is a
I feel like it's interesting because I do think that I have quite consciously been writing female leads since my daughter was born. That it turned into a thing of writing books that I'd wished I'd had waiting for me when, she got to be like 12, 13. And of course, she in fact has just read them all before she got to be that old. And I'm occasionally like, maybe I shouldn't have put that in that book. But that sense of wanting to do that's been a conscious feeling for me.
I actually started this book from Vince's point of view, and I wrote a lot of the beginning over and over again. So not so much of the beginning, but many beginnings from his point of view, and it was interesting to discover that it wasn't his story.
Right.
So yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I actually, in here the moments of changing point of view in Book of Night are like, especially that last one. Sorry. I'm just, Holly and I are just going to chat here. It's like, it was just so satisfying. It was like, check, right? And they're like, yes. Right, where you see it make that turn. So here's, I think you kind of talked about this. Did anything in real life inspire the creation of the glow mists? And so seeing those shadow magic. Were there any other pieces that you didn't mention yet?
I mean, there are a lot of urban legends around shadows and shadow people. Seeing, like, I think they call it hypnagogic thingies where you wake up and you think that you're paralyzed and you see a shadow is apparently a thing that really happens to people, and is at least part of why we have the kind of stories we have about shadow people, who then there are some about them actually like smothering you and stuff.
Right there. That's scary. All right, so I've just been told we're going to hit our Q&A time. So if you have questions, please wave your hands. I see a hand eagerly raised in the back, where somebody with a mic will come to you.
Hi. So I have a question in comparison for your YA series, The Folk of the Air, and this book. In the blurbs on the back of Book of Night, they mention sex and kink. And in comparison to how you wrote the Folk of the Air series, where it's like a lot of sensuality and sexuality, how did you feel more freedom writing for an adult audience, like sex? Like, how did you approach that?
I mean, I guess theoretically yes, but I don't know that I am a particularly I don't know that I don't know how explicit it is. I mean, I always like kink, obviously, but
I do feel like the adult in this is like the putting on the lipstick before she goes to fight, right? It is the going to her job every day. Right? You feel that weight of adulthood.
That is more. I was very interested in stagnation, which I know does not. But I was really interested in the way that adulthood fixes you in place.
Right. Well, and then obviously what's fun is the way in which it's it's breaking out of the stagnation. It's cutting yourself free.
It's much harder, right? It's much harder when you're the older you get.
Right. Well, obviously she has these responsibilities. She feels like she's taken on, the things that you have to carry along. Right? You got to pay rent. All right. Many other questions. If you're near in the back, we'll move forward. Yep, right there.
Hello. I just had a question about your world building. If you can go into more detail, whether it differed from the YA series, the Folk of the Air series, to this series. Just kind of talk about it. It's really good.
I think one of the pleasures of writing in fairy is that you have so much material to write with. Right? You have all of these stories. You have all of these rules that you're choosing between. And one of the pleasures of making up your own magic system is that you have none of that, right? That you have to create it from the ground up, and therefore you get to create parameters. And it's really, really fun to make that stuff up. It's also really, really fun not to have to, and to, write into a world that already exists and that people already feel has resonance, the way they do with stories about fairies or stories about vampires or what have you.
I would agree. All right, right here on the edge.
Hello. Would you ever return to Jude and Carden, possibly more in the adult setting also? I don't know, I didn't mean it like that. Well, but would you ever return to them, maybe give more soft moments, or as I said, as they grow older?
So I will write more books in fairy, but they will probably be YA books. I have plans that I could tell you about in June. Turned in a book right before I came on tour. Hey. But it is not adult, and it is actually sort of sideways. It's Elfhame, but sideways. So some other people.
Actually, so that's an interesting question, though. Would you ever consider taking? Obviously, there's some sort of not practical concerns, but more caretaking concerns. Do you want to, if you have young readers, do you want to take a series in a direction that they can't necessarily go? But would you ever be interested in taking characters, for instance, that started younger and moving them into an older part of their lives, making a jump? Or would you rather just start a new universe if you were going to write adult?
it is really interesting because you're right. There's a lot of practical concerns to like, would people find it if it was in a different part of the bookstore? And also, I've definitely read books where, how old are the characters exactly at this point? You're not really sure.
Yeah.
Like the later Megan Whalen Turner.
It's
thieves,
like
how
it's like
old are they?
right.
Like I feel like you can.
It's
tell
like
the stories that
70
people-
years later.
Like I feel like there's more space to do that than it initially seems. Like especially in fairy where people don't age, I feel like I could really, continue to do that. I think that people often think of adult too as being very different, whereas I'm not sure that, when you're reading contemporary YA, I'm not sure it actually is that different.
I have to say, I don't know whether a book I'm writing is, adult or YA, and I just hand it to the publisher, and they decide, right, where it's going to be shoved.
So are you surprised sometimes?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I was like, in fact, I remember with the Scholomance, I in fact, I was quite traumatized because I went to my editor with the Scholomance. I was like, I don't think you're going to be interested in this because obviously it's in conversation with Harry Potter. Mm-hmm. And she was like, well, all the kids who were 10 years old when Harry Potter was published are all in their 30s now. And I was just like, yeah, how did that happen? And, all right, let's get, so you know what, I'm gonna come up this way and then go down that way. Right here in the middle of this row.
Hi, first of all, you are one of my favorite authors of all time. I love all of your books, genuinely. Going back to the question about world building, is there anything you keep in mind when constructing the lore of a world, like a main point that you try to keep in mind that you think is important?
Is there one thing that I try to keep in
Yeah,
mind?
like one specific thing.
Okay, yes, it's kind of weird. It's the way it feels. It's a kind of texture to it, and it's why I feel like I need to start by writing the beginning of everything and getting the feeling right, because I feel like that's like when you go and get your hair cut, they pull that one piece and then they try to cut everything else to that. Like I feel like that's the thing I need to make a world. And it is extremely annoying for my critique partners, who I will sometimes go and be like, so, I have this feeling, and I kind of can see this image in my mind that you can't see. What kind of story might go with that? Like, how should this protagonist move forward? And they're like, I need one more thing. Like, but that is the thing I start with is this feeling of how the magic should feel. And if it doesn't feel that way, and if the characters don't feel that way, and if the plot doesn't feel that way, then I know I've gone off course. What do you start with?
I feel very often I'm in conversation with something. So for like Spinning Silver, I was in conversation with Rumpelstiltskin very closely. And typically that becomes a touch point. And there's certain keys. So for me with the Scholomance books, it was the sense that the school, the legend, the underlying legend of this idea of the school where you pay with your soul. You're risking your soul. What would make people do that? That was a fundamental question, and everything about the world had to answer it. Mm-hmm. And so, for instance, it meant that so who would send their kids to a school like this? In sufficient numbers that these are not, like being thrown into, a pit, right? This is loved children being sent to the school deliberately, which, when you look at Hogwarts, it's a little bit like, why are parents sending their children to this institution? So obviously the answer for me was, it's worse outside. And that clearly becomes the linchpin that turns everything. Yeah, I feel like that's...
It's true, like, fine, I understand why they went first year, but like, why not take them out second year? I just keep my kid home, a little gap year.
So you know what? Actually, one of the things there are a few other. I'm going to give a few other questions from the folks on the internet. Brenna from North Carolina asked, "What do you love most about the beginning of a new book, and where in the process are you most creative?"
Oh gosh. I mean, I always like the part where you're writing a different book and you're sort of sneaking away to write the book that's coming, right? The book that you are super excited to write and is gonna be easy and everything is gonna go perfectly and you totally understand it this time. I love that moment. I love the beginning.
When you're cheating on the book that you're under deadline
writing with a different book, that is the best moment. And I really like the beginning, when the beginning feels right and all of a sudden I understand something about it that I didn't understand before. And then I love actually really late in the process when I am able to go in and push everything to make each scene more extreme and make each person's sort of reaction more specific. I really like that sort of like cutting away the dross part and like expanding things and turning things so that things are worse and more painful and more delicious.
Yes. And sorry, there was one other.
Do you want to answer that one?
Yes. Oh, hang on. Here's another one. So Annie Laurie from Virginia asks, what stands out to you as a moment you knew you were telling, this is her wording, which I think is quite nice. You knew you were telling not just a story you wanted, but the way you wanted to tell it.
Right.
Yeah. Do you feel like there was a moment, a key moment in Book of Night?
I think there were moments for each scene where the scene either wasn't working and then was working. And I talk about this a lot about, like, it feels like your arm is a little out of place. And it's the weirdest feeling when something isn't working, but you don't know why. When I was writing Darkest Part of the Forest, I knew that the character had a secret. And I would go to my friends and be like, what is the secret? And they were like, the book is fine. But I knew there was something wrong.
It's always annoying when nobody will tell you what the next piece of the book is, right?
They just tell me what. But like, it was that feeling of wrongness that was actually like in the body when something isn't working. And there's that moment for me in each scene, or in the book, or when I come up with sort of a turn at the end. Especially.
So what do you do actually when you have that sense of wrongness? Do you go back to the scene? Do you just sort of like take multiple cracks at it? What kind of puts the joint back in?
I ideate for a while. Like, I just think over and over and over about it until I have an idea of what I can do to fix it, and then I do go back and change it, and that isn't always the right fix.
Right.
Like, there were some things that weren't, there was some romantic stuff that I was really pushing around and couldn't quite get to work. And there was some point where I changed it and I went to Cassie Clare and Kelly Link, who lived near me, and I was like, okay, I fixed it. And they're like, you've made it worse. But like, and so I just had to keep going and keep going and keep going. And then there really was that moment where I was like, oh, I get it. And it was weirdly something that I had known at the beginning and forgotten.
That's interesting. Yeah, that's fun. So do you? I guess that's sort of an interesting piece, that it's something that you had in your mind before, and it kind of comes back.
And I let it go for some unknown reason, and then when I remembered it, I was like, oh right, of course, right. It's this.
Yeah. All right, do we have questions on this side that we didn't get to? Right here in the second row.
Hi, first I want to say my entire 4th grade class loves your Magisterium series. We currently have a wait list for who gets to read it next, so they wanted me to give them a shout out, so I just want to say that. And then my question is, a lot of your YA series, as you've talked about, they connect a lot. I know the first one just came out, but do you have any plans or envision maybe writing more adult books in this world, but with different characters?
I definitely could. I remember when I was a kid, I read the Wrinkle in Time series, and then there's another series, it's like the Meet the Austins series, and there was a moment when I realized they were in the same world. And it like completely blew my mind. And I think that one of the things that I really like about writing things that are in the same world is that feeling of all of a sudden the world is bigger because you know more pieces of it.
Right. That's true. I love that. Yes, right here.
Hi, I'm curious on what your favorite tropes are to read and to write.
No, I'd be curious about yours too. I love I love a sort of a villain redeemed. I love some villain redeemed. Obviously, I like some enemies to lovers. Yeah.
Yeah, I like fealty. The king and Lionheart, that kind of thing. Yeah, I feel like, I like emperors actually in fiction, not real life. But this is why like Napoleon had to be my enemy in the Temeraire series, because I was too much of a Napoleon fangirl. I was like, no, he can't be on the good side. He's got to be the villain. Too powerful otherwise, right? So yeah.
Oh, I do love a sad king. Love a sad king.
Sad kings are good.
Doesn't want to be king. So hard being king.
Yep. But yeah, I mean, the thing that I love about tropes and about storytelling with tropes, and storytelling in conversation in general, right, is that it sort of expands the way that you can play with, because every book, right, is a conversation with each individual reader. And so you're sort of playing with what is already in the reader's head. Right? And so when you're telling the reader a story that they're like, oh, I recognize that part. Oh, it's Baba Yaga. Oh, it's, right? I recognize this piece of Rumpelstiltskin. It means that you can go in multiple directions, right? You can either give them the story that they expect, where it's like, oh, the pleasure of recognition, right? Or you can give them something completely different. We're like, oh, we're off the map. We're totally new. Or you can give them something that it's not quite the same, like it's just turned, right? And
right. You can reverse expectations, right? It's true, right? One of the ways that you can generate surprise is for people to believe they're in one trope when it turns out they're in a different one.
Right.
It is true that the pleasure of tropes are both leaning into them and then pulling away from them.
Right. All right. Let's see. There in the back, in the cap.
Hello. Thank you
Sorry,
for
I'm
being
a Yankees fan, so.
Thank you for being here. My question is, what's one book that you've read recently that you would recommend?
Great
This
question.
one. Sorry. you might have heard of it. It's good.
I'm trying to think, I'm currently reading right now Scalzi's new book, The Kaiju Preservation Society. Really enjoying it. It's really fun. My mind has gone completely blank. Let's see, what did I read recently? Olive E. Blake's Atlas 6, which I really loved.
I've been reading the SAS Survival Handbook, How to Survive Anywhere, I literally, the problem is I don't remember titles. I see the book sitting in front of me, and I'm like, what's on that book? Yeah,
it's all gone. As soon as somebody asks
that question, it automatically, you're like, there are other books. It's like, okay, wait, I'm reading about Stalin. That one. No, although slightly, unfortunately, topical at this point. Any other questions? Yes, here in the middle row. There are multiple people. Yes.
Hi, I love your dress, first of all, Holly. But I'm just wondering how your approach to storytelling and plot changes between writing standalones versus trilogies versus duologies now.
Yeah.
So I am probably the rare person who loves a middle book in a trilogy. They are my favorites. I think they're so much fun to write. I think, first books are all set up and you have to make all of these decisions and you have to kind of figure out who the characters are and how the world works. And then third books are all paying bills. And so I love second books. Second books are just about making things worse for everyone. They're just straight character torment from beginning to end. I love them. And I love standalones because I enjoy that it is self-contained. Like I think some of my favorite books are always going to be standalones because they give you the entire experience. Right. So I think, but they're compressed. And so they, there's a lot more space in something longer. I think I'm trying to figure out, so I'm writing some duologies. It's an interesting new thing to do.
Yes.
We'll see.
Yeah.
See how they work.
Yeah. For me, I almost only want to write standalones in practice, and then decide where the divisions into what's actually going to get bound together into a single unit, based on the energy of the book. So, for instance, for me, Scholomance was going to be, there was a unified story, and I wanted to just write the whole thing. And so we were like, I'm going to write these 2 books. And then halfway through the first book, I was like, oh, it's 3 books. And then there wasn't enough time, and I had to give up my dream
Of writing everything.
of writing everything beforehand. But at the same time, I still knew that I wanted it to be multiple books because I wanted the beat of the school year, right? And that sort of sense that you get, like you close the door on a year, that rhythm that's so powerful, right, in our memories, in our lives, right?
It's true, like making people wait, right? Is actually part of the experience of a trilogy, though. That moment of like tension, even if they're all out, the moment of tension of I've closed this book and I must go figure out where I put the other one. Like it is a beat, and
Yeah.
I do think it is part of the experience.
Yeah. No, I agree. It's different than just a complete standalone book in a single work, in a way that's not just, ideally, I would say that's kind of the thing that ideally when I'm doing, something that's going to be all in one book versus a book that's broken up, there's a reason for it to be in parts, right? That there is that sort of, you want that punctuation landing in the middle of the story, and you use it. Right. All right, back there.
Hi, so I have a Folk of the Air specific question, kind of a bit spoilery for book 3, but so my friend and I, who were actually friends because when I met her, she was reading The Cruel Prince, and we've debated over this for like actual hours, like I'm not kidding. In the 3rd book, do you think Carden would have ever told Jude what he wrote in the letters or not?
Would he ever have told her what? No, absolutely not. He's deeply ashamed of everything. No, you have to. I mean, he can't lie, so under the right circumstances, I suppose he'd have to. But he would not want to.
Do we have time for one last one, or are we done? One more. All right, back there, furthest in the room.
Hi.
I like your hair.
Oh, thank you. I love your hair. So I'm also from Jersey, and hey Jersey. I found your books when I was in high school and rediscovered them recently, and went through the whole process of reading Folk of the Air as well. And I just, with you mentioning earlier, revisiting, I guess, writing in the area that you live in now, because I deeply relate to all the locations that are in the Modern Fairy Tales trilogy, and that's something that was that I really connected with, and that I could feel that you connected with in your writing. So did you make a departure from writing the physical, real-life places that you knew during, Folk of the Air, because you were still learning your new, neighborhood, or, what's your outlook on that? Thank you.
So when I originally came up with the idea for the Folk of the Air books, I actually did not think they were fairy books. I thought they were high fantasy, secondary world books. And I messed around with them a little bit that way, and then realized, oh, these work really, really well in fairy. And they give me something new. And so that's actually why they live in this kind of liminal place of being kind of secondary world and kind of, in the traditional world of contemporary fantasy fairy. And they were an opportunity also to, write fairy differently, because they were insider books, right? You grew up in the fairy court. All of a sudden, I had to actually answer questions that I had elided in the past, and I had to really be like, okay, well, how does all this work, and what is it like to live there? And so they were also a way for me to write in a space that I was familiar with writing, but have it actually feel differently enough to me. Of course, then, you know, like all things, you're like, oh, a challenge for me. Oh, hard things are hard. What do you think about landscape when you write?
I mean, I do think that it's absolutely critical, right? The shape of the spaces that characters are in needs to be sort of very real, and it is one of the things that comes quite late to me. In Scholomance, I was about halfway through before I understood the architecture of the Scholomance, and had to go back and change all the description, everything, yeah. And realize that my reference was like the Titanic as opposed to, you know, stone schools of magic. Right?
Now, I don't know, but it seems to me that you are going to have an experience not unlike going from writing like modern fairy tales to writing Folk of the Air, in the sense that you are now leaving the Scholomance.
Well, yes.
Right? And you have to reinvent the world. It's not the
Right.
same world because now you're in a totally different landscape, and you're in a, like, was that...
Yeah, I mean, it was.
You're like, wait, what?
Yes. No.
Why did I do this in the third book?
No, but I mean, I knew that I wanted to go into the enclaves, right? I wanted to sort of think about those spaces, and again, create different versions of them, and that is always, you know, going into a new space is a chance to sort of expand the world, expand the characters. And so I was very excited to do it, actually. I was like, yay, get out of the school.
I think that is a lovely place to end our conversation. But could you please give another round of applause to Naomi Novik and Holly Black? Thank you both so much for being here tonight. Congratulations, Holly, on the new book, Book of Night, everybody. So if you guys could just stay in your seats for a moment as we clear the stage. We actually have a few events coming up for the rest of the week as well. So Friday, we have CSC's Assassins in to celebrate the cast album release. And then at the end of the month, we actually have actor Colton Haynes from Teen Wolf and Arrow here for his new memoir, Memory Lane. So we hope that we get to see you guys then. And thanks so much. Have a great night. We have more signed copies back by the register, and we also have more copies of their backlist as well. Thanks so much, guys.